The alien empire had survived wars, supernovas, and 3 separate attempts to replace reality with something more efficient. What it had not survived was a spreadsheet. Bloodlines were everything. Heritage determined rank, rank determined power, and power determined whether your name was spoken with reverence or quietly deleted from historical records. For thousands of cycles, this system worked perfectly, until it didn't. Birth rates declined, compatibility narrowed, and the once glorious dynasties began folding in on themselves like overused data files. The solution, according to the Empire's brightest minds, was simple. Outsource. Humans were not chosen because they were powerful. They were chosen because they were adaptable, stubbornly resilient, and, according to a distressingly cheerful report, biologically cooperative. This was how a single human ended up sitting in a quiet docking lounge, half awake, nursing a lukewarm drink, and skimming a contract projected in the air in front of him. The contract was long. Incredibly long. It scrolled with the confidence of a document that knew no one would ever read it. Paragraphs bloomed into subparagraphs, which immediately branched into footnotes, appendices, and something labeled Supplemental Cultural Interpretations, Volumes 1 through 9. He squinted at it, blinked twice, and rubbed his face. Cultural exchange, he muttered. Right. The translation AI helpfully summarized in a glowing sidebar: mutual cooperation, non-hostile engagement, contribution toward long-term interspecies understanding. That sounded harmless. He'd signed worse agreements just to get free transit and a meal voucher. An alien official stood patiently nearby, tall and impossibly composed, its posture so straight it looked structural. Multiple eyes blinked in polite synchronization. You may take your time, the official said, voice smooth and carefully neutral. He waved a hand lazily. Nah, it's fine. I trust you guys. That was mistake number 1. He pressed his thumb against the biometric pad. The contract shimmered, pulsed once, and vanished. A soft chime echoed through the lounge. The alien official froze. Then it bowed. Deeply. So deeply that another alien rushed forward in alarm, as if gravity itself might be offended. He frowned. You okay? The official straightened, eyes wide, not with fear, but awe. On behalf of the Continuity Council, we thank you. For the paperwork? He asked. For the future, the alien replied. That was mistake number 2, not asking a follow-up question. At first, nothing changed. He was given a nicer room. Better food. People, aliens technically, started being very polite in a way that felt rehearsed. They asked how he was feeling. If he was comfortable. If he needed rest. Or hydration. Or anything at all, really. He assumed it was standard diplomatic overkill. Then the medical appointments started. They were framed as routine. Non-invasive. Entirely voluntary, said the smiling drones that escorted him from place to place. He didn't see the harm. Humans were always being studied anyway. It was practically tradition. Data was taken. Samples collected. Results analyzed. The scientists were excited. He overheard words like stability, viability, and statistical miracle. One of them laughed so hard it had to sit down. Weeks passed. Then months. That was when the announcements began. They came in the form of congratulatory messages delivered with the enthusiasm of a civilization that had just avoided extinction by a narrow margin. He listened as a translation AI chirped through ceremonial language, titles, and numbers that didn't immediately register. Congratulations, it said. Your contribution has resulted in a successful outcome. Cool, he replied. What outcome? There was a pause. The AI recalibrated. Your genetic contribution has resulted in a viable heir. He stared. Like one? Correct. He processed that. Slowly. Okay. Then the AI continued. Additionally, preliminary indicators suggest exceptional compatibility across multiple noble lineages. How many is multiple? Another pause. Longer this time. 5 confirmed. Projections pending. That was mistake number 3, still not panicking. By the time he realized something had gone very wrong, the number had climbed into double digits. He was escorted through halls lined with banners he definitely did not approve. His face appeared on holograms accompanied by phrases that translated poorly but sounded suspiciously like praise. People bowed. Chanted. Once, someone tried to touch his shoulder for luck and was immediately tackled by security. "Guys," he said more than once, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." There hadn't. The Empire was thriving. Each new heir strengthened alliances, reinforced treaties, and stabilized regions that had been on the brink of collapse. Where ancient bloodlines had faltered, human adaptability filled the gaps like a miracle patch. Scientists wrote papers. Politicians smiled for the first time in centuries. He was no longer a contractor. He was an asset. The announcements became routine. 20. 30. 40. He stopped counting after that. At 50, the entire capital world celebrated. Fireworks, bioluminescent, tasteful, and aggressively symbolic, lit the sky. Statues were commissioned. Songs were written. One of them was catchy. He hated that. The official number was broadcast across the empire. 50 heirs. The continuity crisis was over. He sat alone in his room afterward, staring at the ceiling, trying to reconcile his laid-back decision-making process with the fact that he had apparently become a cornerstone of galactic history. "All I did was sign a contract," he muttered. Elsewhere, far beyond the celebrations, a throne room stood silent. The alien queen watched the announcement replay in cold, perfect detail. Her expression did not change. It did not need to. 50 heirs. And none of them were hers. Her fingers tightened against the arm of the throne. The final heir, the heir, had always been meant to secure absolute legitimacy. Tradition demanded it. Power required it. And now, because of one relaxed human and one unread contract, she had been left watching history unfold from the outside. She rose slowly, robes whispering against the floor. "Prepare a summons," she said. The human, wherever he was about to learn that legends rarely get to stay accidental for long. If the first heir had been an accident, the next 10 were a pattern, and by 20 the Empire stopped pretending it was surprised. The announcements came faster after that. What had once been cautious, ceremonial confirmations turned into brisk updates delivered with bureaucratic efficiency, and barely contained delight. He would be eating breakfast when a soft chime sounded and a floating display appeared, politely informing him that another noble lineage had achieved continuity stabilization. "Congrats," he mumbled to the heir, spoon halfway to his mouth. "Happy for you." The Empire, meanwhile, lost its collective mind. Entire departments were created around him. Committees formed to optimize schedules, logistics, and long-term projections. His medical data became the most analyzed set of numbers in recorded history. Scientists argued over charts with the intensity of religious scholars debating scripture. Humans, they concluded, were ridiculous. Not powerful in the traditional sense. Not particularly elegant. But adaptable to a degree that bordered on offensive. Genetic compatibility that should have been statistically impossible kept appearing again and again, as if reality itself had decided to bend the rules out of sheer curiosity. He was called many things. The stabilizer. The unifier. The accidental solution. One enthusiastic journalist dubbed him the man who fixed the empire by showing up. He asked for royalties. They thought he was joking. He tried, several times, to explain that this was never his intention. That he hadn't planned any of it. That he was just doing what he'd been told was part of a cultural exchange. The officials nodded solemnly and thanked him for his humility, which only made things worse. The perks escalated. His living quarters expanded without his consent. What started as a modest diplomatic suite quietly absorbed neighboring rooms, then entire wings. The food got better. The service more attentive. Someone installed a fountain that played soothing music whenever he walked past it. "Guys," he said to an aide one day, gesturing at the fountain. "This is unnecessary. It is the minimum expression of gratitude," the aide replied. He learned to stop arguing. By 30 heirs, the empire's economy had rebounded. Trade routes reopened. Old rivalries softened. Bloodlines that hadn't spoken in centuries suddenly found common ground in shared success. They toasted to the future and, inevitably, to him. By 40, statues started appearing on planets he had never visited. They were all wrong. Too heroic. Too serious. One gave him muscles he definitely did not have. By 50, the word accidental quietly vanished from official records. The announcement was broadcast everywhere. A carefully curated message celebrating unity, stability, and renewal. His image appeared beside a glowing number, stylized and unmistakable. 50. The empire erupted. Festivals were declared. Days of rest granted. Entire populations celebrated a future that, just cycles ago, had looked bleak and uncertain. For many, he wasn't just a contributor. He was hope wrapped in an unassuming human shape. He watched the broadcast from his room, feet up, drink in hand, feeling deeply unqualified. "That seems excessive," he said to no one. The translation AI chimed in, cheerful as ever. "Excessive gratitude is culturally appropriate." "Yeah, well, culturally I'd like a nap." It was during one such nap that he first noticed something strange. The messages changed. The tone shifted from exuberant to careful. Invitations became formal. Requests filtered through additional layers of approval. There was a hesitation now, a sense that something unspoken hovered just out of reach. He asked an aide about it. The aide hesitated. That alone was new. "There is a matter of royal consideration," they said carefully. "Royal?" Another pause. Longer. "The Queen has been observing." That was the first time he heard her mentioned out loud. He knew, vaguely, that there was a queen. Ancient. Powerful. More symbol than person, according to what little he'd been told. She ruled less through direct command and more through the sheer weight of tradition. Her bloodline was the spine of the empire's legitimacy. And apparently she hadn't said a word since the first announcement. That silence, he would later learn, was deafening. While the empire celebrated, she watched. Each update. Each confirmation. Each rising number. 50 heirs, spread across noble houses, strengthening everything except the one thing she cared about most. The final heir. By tradition older than most stars, the Queen's lineage was meant to anchor all others. The last heir was not about quantity, it was about authority. About closing the circle in a way that made succession unquestionable. And now there were 50. All accounted for. None hers. He remained blissfully unaware of this nuance as he navigated his new life as a walking historical event. He learned which ceremonies he could skip and which ones caused diplomatic incidents if ignored. He perfected the art of smiling politely while not understanding a word of what was being said. Through it all, he remained himself. He joked with guards. Thanked staff by name. Asked scientists what they were working on and actually listened to the answers. Treated everyone like a person instead of a function. This, too, unsettled the empire. Legends were supposed to be distant. Elevated. Unreachable. He was none of those things. He was approachable, relaxed, and frustratingly normal. That was what finally pushed the Queen to act. When the celebrations faded and the empire settled into its renewed stability, a single directive cut through the noise. Quiet. Absolute. Impossible to ignore. Prepare a summons. It reached him in the form of a simple notification, far less dramatic than everything else he'd experienced. Attendance requested. The AI read. Royal audience. He stared at the words, then leaned back in his chair. Huh, he said. Took her long enough. Somewhere deep within the imperial palace, the alien queen stood alone, gaze fixed on a future she refused to be excluded from. 50 heirs had changed the empire. But 51, she knew, would change history. The throne room was impossibly vast, built to make even the tallest alien feel small. Light bent around its crystal walls in ways that seemed deliberately disorienting. The air hummed with authority, and the human immediately felt that every step he took was being measured, calculated, and stored somewhere in the Empire's endless databases. He had never felt so conspicuously casual. He waited. Or at least, he thought he was waiting. A presence entered the room before he even saw her. The alien queen moved like a current in water, deliberate and silent. Centuries of ruling had sharpened her into a blade of precision. Every gesture radiated control. Every glance carried weight heavier than the largest starship. She paused, letting him take in the room, then herself, then the fact that this was not a social visit. "I've been observing," she said, her voice layered with authority, irritation, and something he couldn't quite name. It was not what he expected. He had imagined cold, distant royalty, perhaps a formal rebuke. He had not imagined curiosity. Nice to meet you, your, queenliness," he said, grinning awkwardly. I'm me. You've probably heard of me?" She raised an eyebrow. "I have observed 50 heirs attributed to your contribution." She said it like it was a fact, a number, a crime, and a compliment all at once. "And yet you remain singularly human." He shrugged. "Yeah, I try to keep it low-key. Helps with stress." 50. She repeated, eyes narrowing. "Do you understand what that means?" "Sort of," he replied. "It's a lot. Definitely a lot. I didn't really keep track after 20? 30? Honestly, I lost count somewhere between lunch and dinner." She paused. That pause lasted long enough for a human to feel like a geological era. Then she smiled carefully, a hint of something dangerous and playful lurking in the curve of her mouth. "You are infuriatingly ordinary." That should have been insulting. He didn't take it that way. Humans had a talent for ignoring implied threats when it was convenient. He smiled. "Ordinary works for me. Helps me stay out of trouble." It did not. Not for her. "You were not intended to be ordinary," she said, voice dropping to a tone that suggested she could crush him with thought alone. "You were intended to be the final piece of the bloodline. The heir I would personally claim. The 51st. "Oh," he said, finally catching on. 51, huh? That's pretty specific. Why me? Why you?" Her eyes flashed. "Because you, unlike all others, are adaptable. Resilient. Unpredictable. You have a human's unique ability to persist in ways no algorithm can forecast. And you did not seek glory. You did not demand praise. You merely exist, and yet, everything flourishes around you." He laughed softly. "So I'm like the ultimate plant fertilizer? Does this come with a badge?" Her lips twitched, almost imperceptibly, and it was clear she considered that joke unacceptable. "You misunderstand the gravity of the situation." He nodded solemnly. "Right. Grave. Very heavy. Got it." She frowned, and for a moment the room became colder. Then, with a shift so subtle it might have been a trick of the light, her posture softened. It was the first time he noticed she was not only observing authority but also emotion. Loneliness. Burden. Centuries of rule compressed into a gaze that seemed to weigh entire civilizations. "I have lived longer than most empires survive," she said quietly. "And I have seen everything. The continuation of my bloodline is not mere tradition, it is survival, legitimacy, legacy. And now, it has slipped beyond my reach." He realized she was not angry at him. Not really. She was frustrated by circumstance, by centuries of protocol, by a situation that even her authority could not control. And yet, she was curious about him. Intrigued. Perhaps even challenged. "Well," he said, cautiously optimistic, "you're looking at the guy who accidentally solved your empire's problem. If you're upset, I get it. But maybe there's a way to make it, mutually beneficial?" Her eyes narrowed. "Mutually beneficial?" He nodded. "Sure. 50 errors, 0 complaints. I mean, except for the occasional paperwork, but otherwise, perfect track record. Maybe we can negotiate, the final one. She studied him, tilting her head ever so slightly. You are remarkably unflappable. I find panic overrated, he said, grinning. Also, I'm lazy. It's easier this way. And then, almost imperceptibly, the tension shifted. She leaned forward, curiosity replaced judgment with intrigue. And yet, she said softly, there is a sincerity about you that I cannot ignore. I expected arrogance. I expected fear. I expected calculation. But you… He shrugged again, the universal human gesture of helpless honesty. I just do my thing. Things seem to work out. Lucky, I guess. She laughed. Not a full laugh, but a musical, fleeting sound that carried centuries of solitude. You are audacious, she said. Do you understand audacity, human? Sort of, he said. It's like being brave but more fun? She blinked, momentarily thrown. You are unlike any being I have encountered. And yet I want the 51st. Not because I must, but because I choose it. Whoa, he said. Choice, huh? I can respect that. Totally consensual? She gave him a look so direct it felt like gravity had shifted. I am the queen. I rarely ask. And when I do, it is for what I desire. He laughed, leaning back slightly. Good to know. Well, let's see if we can work something out before the Empire faints from shock. For the first time in centuries, she did not simply assert power. She negotiated, observed, and, without fully admitting it, felt the pull of something entirely foreign, mutual respect, amusement, and perhaps the beginnings of something more. And so the human and the queen, unequal in power yet strangely aligned in wit and stubbornness, began the delicate dance of politics, legacy, and unspoken attraction. Neither could have predicted that humor and honesty would be as powerful as laws, traditions, and bloodlines, but in that room, for the first time, they were. The stage was set. 50 heirs had secured the empire. 51 would secure something far more complicated, the intersection of choice, desire, and a human's stubbornly unshakable charm. And neither of them would be the same again. The summons had been delivered, and for the first time in his accidental legend, the human realized he actually had a choice. 50 heirs had already cemented his place in the empire's history, but the 51st was different. This one wasn't about statistics, projections, or legacy. This one was personal. And the queen, who had ruled with centuries of authority, expected it to be serious, respectful, and, most importantly, her decision. He stood in the waiting chamber, a room designed to make visitors question their worth, though he didn't. Humans had a strange talent for ignoring intimidation when they didn't see the point of it. He scratched his head, glanced at a holographic display of the Empire's history, and shrugged. Well, he muttered, here goes nothing. The door slid open, and she entered, radiant and composed, carrying the full weight of her throne room presence even in this smaller space. She didn't speak at first, only studied him. He felt the gaze of centuries of rule, tradition, and expectation pressing on him, but he also sensed something softer beneath it, curiosity, maybe even amusement. I will not be one of many, she began, her voice calm but firm. I will be 51. He blinked. Okay. That's very specific. Is that a ceremonial thing, or… It is neither ceremony nor tradition, she said. It is choice. Mine. And I intend to claim what should have been mine, not because the Empire demands it, but because I desire it. He laughed softly, a nervous, charmless sound that seemed to cut through the formal tension in the room. Choice, huh? I can do choice. I like choice. Makes life simpler. She raised an eyebrow. Do you understand the implications? Implications are your problem, he said with a grin. I just make sure everyone's happy and nobody explodes. Works every time, mostly. Her expression flickered, part irritation, part disbelief, and something dangerously close to admiration. For centuries she had ruled by precision, by law, by fear. And yet, here was a human who treated centuries of protocol like a casual suggestion, and somehow made it acceptable. The Empire expects loyalty, she continued, her tone shifting between regal command and quiet vulnerability. It expects obedience. It expects tradition. You subvert all of these without realizing it. He shrugged again. Well, humans do that a lot. Gets results. Keeps life interesting. She studied him, eyes narrowing slightly, and then something softened in her gaze. And yet, you are honest. You are consistent. You do not seek power. And somehow, you are the center of it all. He laughed again, shaking his head. Yeah, that's probably the weirdest compliment I've ever gotten. Honestly, it feels like a lot of responsibility for someone who was mostly trying to get through the week. You underestimate yourself, she said, almost quietly. You are remarkable. He smiled, feeling the absurdity of the situation. 50 heirs, interstellar bureaucracy, centuries of tradition, and yet here they were, negotiating something that neither of them had anticipated: desire, respect, and, if he was lucky, mutual understanding. So, he said, leaning forward slightly, you want 51. I get it. And I want to make sure it's all above board. No one's forced, nobody explodes, everyone gets cake. Sound fair? The Queen blinked, unaccustomed to humor in these circumstances. Then, impossibly, she nodded. Fair. Though cake is irrelevant. He laughed. Cake is always relevant. The negotiation continued, not in the usual rigid, formal manner of diplomacy, but like two people discovering they could bend rules together without breaking the universe. He asked questions, she answered honestly. She tested his patience, he challenged her assumptions. They both found it engaging, in ways neither had expected. Finally, they reached agreement, not dictated by law, not enforced by tradition, but chosen. 51 would be hers, not by duty, not by protocol, but because she wanted it, and because he, in his human way, respected her choice while making his own. The Empire, of course, reacted predictably. Officials scrambled to rewrite statutes. Clerics muttered about precedent. Historians revised texts. Statues were updated. Broadcasts aired explaining the human choice phenomenon in terms no one fully understood but all celebrated. He, as usual, shrugged through it all, accepting polite thanks and carefully avoiding the title of hero. The Queen, for her part, had shifted as well. She had ruled for centuries, yet now she felt something unfamiliar, a partnership born not of obligation, fear, or protocol, but of mutual respect, amusement, and an odd sort of affection. She realized that her centuries of careful planning had prepared her not for control, but for discovery, and discovery had come in the form of a human who could navigate complexity with a grin and a shrug. For the first time, the human and the Queen were equals in a strange new way. The 51st heir was no longer a number. It was a symbol of choice, of collaboration, of humor and respect. Together, they had rewritten centuries of expectation without intending to. And in the quiet moments afterward, when the ceremonial music faded and the Empire settled into renewed stability, they shared something neither had expected. Not love in the immediate, poetic sense, but a bond forged from absurdity, admiration, and the simple truth that both had survived chaos with humor intact. The human glanced around, still trying to process the fact that he was, officially, at the center of galactic history again. So, he said, smiling. 51. Check. Did we do it right? The Queen studied him, lips curving ever so slightly. We did, she said softly. And the Empire will survive not just because of duty, but because of choice. He grinned. Choice beats duty any day. Works for me. And in that moment, amid centuries of tradition, endless heirs, and interstellar politics, the human realized something profound. Sometimes the most powerful acts were not commanded by law or enforced by might. They were chosen, with laughter, respect, and perhaps, in the quietest ways, affection. The galaxy had changed. The empire had stabilized. 51 was complete. And neither the human nor the queen would ever forget that it was their choices, their humor, and their mutual understanding that had made history truly remarkable. It was, by every standard imaginable, a human-sized miracle in a universe too often obsessed with protocol, numbers, and perfection. And somehow, perfectly, absurdly it worked.